Hi everyone and welcome to this Bonita Camp webinar. So I'm Antoine Motier, Technical Evangelist at Bonita Soft, and today I will do this presentation of Bonita, and the aim of this Bonita Camp is also to let you create and build your first process-based application using Bonita. So we'll have a mix of theoretical presentation and practical exercise. Also, we'll have some dedicated time to answer your question. So feel free to post your question using GoToWebinar. And after each chapter, I would try to dedicate some time to answer your question. Also, as we have a lot of participants today, I encourage you to go onto our community forum to ask your question if you didn't get any answer during this session. And you can also get in touch with us using the contact form on our website on bonitasoft.com. But first, before we start, just like to run this quick checklist. So first of all, I will ask you to download the Bonita Camp resources. So that's the slide deck, but as well also the exercise instruction, the PDF with all the details about the exercise we'll do today. And also you have the solution of the exercise, so the files we will build with Bonita. So you can just type in the URL you see here, or you can go also on github.com and search for Bonita Camp, and you will get there the latest release, and you can find the content actually of that match the link I provide on the slide here. So just show you quickly that if you go on GitHub, you search GitHub here for Bonita Camp, and actually there will be one result here. Just click there, go to release, and on the latest you can download the English zip file, the BPM Camp EN zip file that include all the slide deck and exercise instruction. So in order to do all the exercise we'll have today, you need to have Bonita Studio up and running. So make sure you download the studio, you have Java installed. That's a prerequisite for the studio. If you use one of our installer for Bonita Studio, it comes bundled with Java, so it should not be necessary to install it separately. And when you launch the studio, just try to click on the portal button in the toolbar to make sure that the Bonita portal actually is able to open. Also, one quick advice, during our development, I recommend to use Chrome or Firefox for development. This is easier to debug the forms when you have some requests, when you want to inspect the page we will build. There are better tooling, or at least I'm more familiar with those tooling, so I can provide advice on this web browser. Of course, when the end user, when the people will use Bonita application, they can use Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer, Safari. We support all kind of web browser, but this is just recommendation for development. So now a quick overview of the agenda of today's webinar. So this webinar will last around 3.5 hours. First, we'll try to have a very quick overview on BPM goals, why we believe that BPM approach is nice for building application. But quickly then we will focus on what is the Bonita solution, so it details you about the different components that we'll use, how we use the BPMN standard, so BPMN 2.0 standards to define process, to modelize process with Bonita. And of course, as we're speaking about the application, we'll see how we handle data in our application, how we display them in a web interface for the end users. Also related to the fact that we have a BPM-based application, we need to dispatch the various tasks of the process to the different people. So we'll see this in the actors chapters. Then another part that is a little bit specific to Bonita is this capability to connect with external systems. So we have this library of connectors that are available out of the box. We'll have an example about how Bonita can be integrated with a third-party solution. And finally, if we have time, usually it's a little bit short, but at least I will try to cover that in the presentation. We'll see how we built BPM-based application in Bonita, how you can abstract a little bit this process view for the end user by creating some application, and say 2 words about deployment of a Bonita application, what is involved in a deployment of a Bonita application. So let's say a few words about what why we consider BPM useful to build application. One of the main advantages of the BPM methodology is that people will collaborate to the definition of the process that are used in the company. Sorry. But they will also collaborate to the execution. We go one step further when we use a solution like Bonita, because we automate the process execution. So describing the process will help all the people involved in the process to have a more global view of the process, so collaborate better with each other. But also having the automation help us to track the execution and ultimately be able to optimize the process. So that's really a big advantage, especially when you start to automatize the process execution. It's really a nice feature to be able to track your process, visualize where step you are at and what can be improved, like maybe trying to allocate the resource better or try to automate some very frequent process that can help you to save some times. So how Bonita is architecture and what are the components we'll touch today in this webinar. We have 3 main components in the solution. The first one is what we call Bonita Studio. It's really the developer/business analyst development environment. It's where you will create the process definition, the data model, your user interface and so on. So you really use this studio to create your process and application. Once you build this application, we actually need some software to execute the process logic. That's what we call the Bonita engine. So we'll run the process, dispatch the task to the user, and so on. But for the end user to interact with the process, to interact to view the data that was collected by the process, to be able to interact with the application, we need a user interface, and that is the Bonita portal. This is a web-based user interface. So you have a portal, you can connect, you can see the tasks that are pending, perform some tasks, view some reports and so on. Bonita portal is also used for administration tasks, and I will get more into detail on that later on. So we have the 3 components, and actually when you combine the engine and the portal together, you got what we call the Bonita platform. So that's the actual server side of the solution. So this is a screenshot of Bonita Studio. For technical details, Bonita Studio is based on the IDE, Eclipse IDE. So it's developed in Java, so it requires this Java virtual machine in version 8 to run. And it has many features to create your application. First of all, it will let you do this process modeling that we'll learn today, like using the BPMN standard. It's what you can see here, like with the start of the process, the task, gateways, so different flow of your process and the termination of the process. But it's not only the process model, but it's also associated data, so the data that will be handled by the process how we update them, what are the various attributes of the data we manipulate in our process. And one other key aspect of the studio is it provides this tool that we call the UI designer that will let you define user interface. And this tool is quite easy to use to have, at least even for a business analyst, to create a first mock-up of the user interface. It's really very friendly. You just have this palette of widgets on the left, and you can drag and drop them on the right to build your web user interface, and you have this button to preview the web user interface. So combining the studio that have this nice visual solution to define the process, and also having this UI designer to quickly mock up some user interface, you have really a nice tool to capture your user needs and to build applications that will actually really answer end user expectation. So, as I said, we need to have this technical component to execute the process logic. And for that we have Bonita engine. So it's obviously without any user interface. It's a pure technical component of the solution. Again, this one is also based on Java, but we provide REST API, so you can integrate this with any other software, like if you are using PHP, .NET, whatever language you are using, you can integrate Bonita with. And this is actually packaged as a Java web application. So in order to deploy our Bonita engine, you will need a Java Enterprise Edition application server. So it's, for example, Tomcat or Wildfly. And in order to make this deployment easier, we provide some pre-packaged bundle with Bonita and Tomcat, Bonita and Wildfly. And we provide also a Docker image ready to be used. Also, one thing about Bonita that I didn't mention previously, but we have two different editions of the solution. We have our community edition, that is free and open source, and we have a subscription edition that comes with some support, of course, that we use in our training, official training, and that also have some additional feature. And for this version, we have an additional component that automate the deployment, for example, on Amazon AWS. So deployment in the cloud in just one command and a few minutes, we have a solution to have a deployment in the cloud. Take a quick look here at the Bonita portal. So Bonita portal, as I said, is at the same time the user interface, the web interface for the end user. So you'll get this kind of task list, just like similar to an inbox of his webmail. But it's also the interface for the administrator. You will see when we'll use the portal, in the upper right corner, you have this drop-down list here. By default, it's on the user profile, but our test user also have this administrator profile, so you can switch to the administration view, and here you can, for example, deploy your process, configure the process, deploy the application, and optimize the setting of the process. As I said, we create in the UI designer some interface, so we call them forms. Forms are basically associated with each step of the process, and also we have a form in order to actually start the process, create a new instance of this process. So really, forms are the way for a user to input some data and send them in order for the engine to start a new process instance, or in order to execute a task. So user can input some data, so for example here you can select suppliers, and it's also a way for the user to view the data. You can do both in a form, So the user, when he inputs some data, can view the data that another user have previously entered on another form. So forms are associated with the process and the task. But if you want to have a more data-centric view, we have what we call application. So basically, application is a collection of pages. So they are really similar to forms, actually. They are created also with a UI designer with the same component. It's just that they are not directly connected to one single specific process. Basically, page application will show you some data that were created or updated by some running process. Just as we can see here, we can have a list of procurement requests that have been created by running some process. And you can actually see here we have a button to start a new request. So this will actually trigger the execution of a new process. When you select one of the procurement requests that is pending for quotation, for example, you then have some details and you have some action button to actually perform the related task. So this is a nice way to aggregate data that helps the user to interact with the process with maybe more user-friendly view compared to a list of tasks. Still on the list of tasks you can filter, you can search and so on, but sometimes it's easier to have dedicated user interface to the different use case. For example, you can have this interface for the procurement request, and maybe you can also use Bonita for less critical process like, let's say, vacation management. It can be another dedicated interface, and so we don't mix up in the same task list tasks that belong to different processes. So BPMN is a standard. It's actually created by the Object Management Group, and it's dedicated to process modeling, so business process modeling, but it's not limited or restricted to any specific domain. Like, for example, with Bonita, we see our customer developing health and insurance process, but we also have users who are using Bonita in some retail process, or there is really no limitation to any kind of specific industry sectors when you are using this notation. It's really a generic notation for any kind of business process. And as this notation is standard, it's a nice way, like if you use one software solution to create your process, you can usually then export and import in another solution. So that's make BPMN kind of vendor independent, so you are not locked in with any vendor, at least for the model part of BPMN. So the first step when you want to design a process is to create what we call a pool. So maybe I will show you that in Bonita Studio. I will just quickly go through the slide and then I will demonstrate how to do that in Bonita Studio. So pool is this rectangle shape that will include all the elements of your process, and those elements are at least usually a start event. So this is this green event that will mark the beginning of our process. Then we'll have a connection between a set of different tasks, so some human tasks that require the user to act, so to input some data, to submit a form. Usually it's by submitting the form that the user will tell to Bonita engine that he can move on the process execution. When the business engine, when the Bonita engine reach a human task, it waits until the user actually submits the form. We also have automated tasks, what we call service tasks, that are run automatically by the engine and are mostly used to interact with other solutions. Like, for example, if you want to send an email, or if you want to push a file to a document management solution, or you need to call a web service, for example, all that can be achieved in a service task. And then your process usually ends with this end event, so the red event. And as I said, all are connected with some transition. So if I demonstrate here how to create a process in Bonita quickly. So here you are in Bonita Studio, and sorry, I just realized that I'm currently in French, so I will just go quickly on this demonstration on the notation, then I will restart and switch to English for the user interface of the studio. So in your studio you have a new button on the top left here in the toolbar that will create for you a new diagram. So diagram is kind of specific to Bonita. It's just a canvas where you can design your process. So you can have several processes on one diagram. You can see here on the left I have this palette, and I can select this pool element and I can drop it on my diagram to create multiple pool. But usually my recommendation is just to stick to one pool per diagram. This makes edition and collaboration a lot easier when you only have one pool per diagram. So if you click in this empty area, you select actually the diagram, but if you click on the pool name here on the left, you see that it's all the rectangle outer shape here that is selected. And you can then, in the area below here, configure any settings related to the pool. We'll see later when we'll deal with actors that the pool is divided in lanes, so just like a swimming pool, and we can add various lanes here. And then here with my process, my initial process, I already have a start event and one human task. If I select the task here, I have this little icon on the side, and I can, for example, select and drag a task icon, and then it will create and connect with the previous task a new task here. So by default it will be a service one, you can see with the icon in the upper left corner. But by clicking on this little toolbox or this little tools icon, I can switch to human task. And so I can quickly, by doing some drag and drop, draw my process diagram. So I will not go through all the BPMN elements that we have here in the palette on the left. For today I will just focus on the most useful one. But if you want more information about the other elements, you can check out the documentation available at documentation.bonitasoft.com, and you can get the details about all the elements we have here. So we'll just switch the language of my studio, and then I will go back to a presentation of more Bonita elements, BPMN elements, sorry. So one of the key elements when you modelize, when you draw some process, are what we call the gateways. So we have three different types of gateways in Bonita. We support what we call the exclusive gateways. So basically when the process engine reaches the execution of such gateways, it will then only take one of the outgoing transition of the gateway. So for example here we display this kind of generic gateway, but if it's an exclusive, we'll have only one of the two following tasks that will be taken, that will become active. We can have more than two, like if we have 3-4 tasks. Still, in any situation with exclusive gateway, we are sure that only one of them will be active. With the parallel gateway, it's a little bit different. In this situation, all of them will become active. We don't have any condition, all of them become active. With exclusive, to define which transition need to be taken, you need to have condition on the transition. For parallel gateway, there is no condition at all transitions are taken. And finally, the inclusive one, it's a mix almost of both. Actually, among the all outgoing transition, something between one or several transitions will be active. You can, for example, have two different tasks that will become active based on the condition you define on the transition. And then when all the parallel paths merge together again on an inclusive gateway, this gateway will wait for all the active branch of the process to be done before the process execution continue. So here I will just demonstrate a little bit this kind of design with the gateway. So let's say that I add a parallel gateway here. I will have step 1, step 2, and step 3 in parallel. Merge them together with the same kind of gateway. This is usually a best practice, is to always use a kind of symmetric design. If you start with a parallel gateway, merge again all the branch with a parallel gateway. And then I can have, for example, step 4. So here the logic, when the engine reach gateway 1, it will start to run step 1, step 2, and step 3 in parallel. And when a step is done, it will move to the gateway, but it will wait for all the other steps being done before moving to step 4. So if, for example, like step 1 take 1 minute, but step 2, like if we say that a user interaction is needed, for example, and it's take like 2 hours, it will wait for 2 hours and step 3 to be done before moving to step 4. With an exclusive gateway, you see that I have this little validation here triggered. This means that I need to define some condition, and conditions are not on the gateway itself. You will need to select the transition between the gateway and the task. And here you will see in the settings here that you can use an expression. So you will basically use the data of your process, do some test, and decide which transition need to be taken. So for the example here, I will just put some value, some static value, like I can put true, false, and usually the last transition we always try to have what we call a default flow. Is if all the other transitions are evaluated to be false, like not to be taken, will go through the default flow. This is a nice way to prevent a lock in the gateway, because if all the outgoing transitions are false, you can end up being locked in the gateway. So to prevent that, it's always nice to have a default flow. You see that I still have this little error here. It's just that the validation is not in real time. You need to trigger it again. So by going to this validation status tab and clicking on refresh, you can see that the error is now gone. So just remember, when you have exclusive gateway, define the condition on the transition. For parallel gateway, there is no such condition. And for inclusive gateway, it's just the same. You have condition on the transition. It's exactly as exclusive gateway, sorry. The only difference is like several transitions can become active. Also, I will just go back quickly on the exclusive gateway. You can define in which order the transition will be evaluated. It can be useful if you want to give priority to one task over the other. By selecting the gateway this time, you have this transition ordering option, and you can see, like, if I want to go on step 2 over step 1, like if the conditions that I define on my transition are not exclusive, I can reorder the list here to define my priorities. I've been asked how we can we import like a Viso diagram, so from Microsoft Viso. It's actually possible, but let me check. I think that might be a feature of Bonita subscription edition. I'm not sure, but import, you can find it in the file menu here, import. So you can import what we call a boss archive. So this is a file format we use when you export your work from the Bonita Studio to share it with another user. You can export this as a boss file. Workspace is if you want to import from a previous installation of Bonita. And in other here, yeah, we don't have Visio in the list here, but in the subscription edition of Bonita, we can import a Visio file. I'm not sure about other editor. We have the BPMN standard import. So if the software editor supports the export as BPM standard file, so it's an XML file format, you should be able to import in Bonita Studio. I also have a question regarding the multi-language support for the UI for the end user. Actually, this is possible to support multiple languages also in subscription edition. We provide tooling directly in the UI designer to support the translation. You can find more about that in the documentation. Speaking globally about the solution itself is translated in 4 different languages. We have English, Spanish, Japanese, and French. That's true for the studio, also for the UI designer and for the portal. The documentation is only in English, and also as we have a kind of big community of users, we have collaborative translation, and so you can get extra translation from the community. So for example, we have Russian, we have I think Indonesian as well. We have different users who collaborate through the translation. So regarding the language still for the German, it's partially done on the community, so it has been partially translated. So the translation and community usually focus more on the portal, so for the end user, because it's really where it matters, like to be able to deliver the end user interface in the appropriate language. So we used to have an official translation, now it's more community driven, but German is translated as well. I will also answer one last question about the synchronization of user, actually how to integrate Bonita with an Active Directory for user authentication. Actually, this is also a feature of the subscription edition. By default, there is some solution, we can see that later, to import and export user from the Bonita platform. But if you want to automate the synchronization with Active Directory, this is with the subscription. I will continue with the presentation. Sorry, I cannot answer all the questions because there is a lot of participants today. So if you don't get any answer to your question, for more technical related question, like if you have trouble doing some exercise or doing some configuration, please ask them on Bonita community forum. And for question related to the subscription edition, like particular feature of the subscription edition, you can go to bonitasoft.com on the website, and you will find in the contact us here, you will have a form that you can fill up, and then we'll call back and we can set up some presentation of the subscription features that you might be interested in. So this is more for question related to the subscription edition. As I said, if you want to ask more technical question because you are currently evaluating the community edition, please go to the community forum. You can there ask your question, and both community users and Bonita Soft employee answer the question there. So now we have covered the basic BPMN element. You can already start a first process model, and this is actually in the exercise instruction in the PDF. You will find the instruction to start your first model of Bonita process, and you will see that you can already run it at this stage. It will be very basic in this example because we want to keep it simple so we can touch all the different aspects of creating a Bonita application. But obviously you can go for a lot more complex process. If you want to learn more about the application of the solution, you can find various customer stories on our website with detailed examples about how Bonita is used by different companies. So I will give you a little bit of time to go through this exercise. Just one quick tip. So in Bonita Studio, remember to click the save button to make sure that you don't lose your work in case you have any crash on your system. Also for the validation, as I said, you need to go in this tab and click refresh to make sure that the validation is up to date. If you fix an error and you still see it, just click on refresh, it should disappear. You have access to the same feature in File here and Validate menu. Also, if you have difficulties with one of the exercises, you can actually import the solution. So if you click on the Import button here, click the Browse button, you can go to where you download and unzip the BPM camp files, and you should have the correction, and you can then import the BOSS file. So that will include the process, the data definition, the user interface. So 1.0 here is for the first exercise, obviously. And if I importing that, we'll see that I get the process that we need to modelize in the first exercise. Okay, I will answer one of the questions regarding the integration of complex rules for a condition, like using a rules engine with Bonita. Actually, we'll have a next webinar next month regarding how Bonita can be integrated with one of our partner, DC, business rules management. Sorry. So if you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to join us in this webinar that will demonstrate how it's possible to integrate Bonita with an external solution to do business rules execution and to manage the decision point script outside Bonita. And also I will show you again in Bonita Studio if you want to add different lanes, but we'll use this later in this example. So don't add it right now, but if you want to add a lane, you just click on the lane icon here, and you then click in the diagram, and it will add this subdivision, so the lane subdivision in the process. Okay, so for the first exercise, I will just show you for the condition. As I said, the condition are not on the gateway, so don't select the gateway, but rather select the transition. So if I select this one, for example, the no transition, and if you go to the general tab here, you will see that I have this checkbox. This is actually checked. It's a default flow, and you can see that with this little symbol here on the transition. This default flow will be taken if all the other flow are evaluated to false. Right now, as we don't have any data, and just for the testing, on the other transition, we define the condition here. You just type in this text input, just type true, and the condition will be always true. So if you run the process, actually I can demonstrate that here. I will run the process, and I should always go to the notify request approve task. But this is an automatic task, a service task, so I won't see it in Bonita portal, but I can show you how you can view the history of the process execution and confirm that we go through this particular task. So to run a process, you need to make sure that the process is selected. If the run button is disabled, it's probably that you actually select the diagram. You need to select one process or any element in the process to be able to run the process. So when you click on run, a little bit of magic happens in Bonita. Actually, Bonita Studio comes with an embedded test environment. We have an application server that is bundled with the Bonita Studio, where the Bonita engine and Bonita portal are deployed. So when you click on this run button, it's actually start this server and deploy our process that we define in Bonita Studio and load up the first form to start the process. So here in my web browser, I just have a very basic form that was auto-generated for me just to start the process. And if I click on start here, so you're gonna figure out that I'm in French. I will change to English. You can see that I have one pending task here, the validate request task. As this request by default is for a group of users, and in order to avoid concurrent action on a single task, I need to claim the task so another user doesn't try to do it while I'm working on it. So I'll click on the tag button, and then here I can submit this task. Right now we don't have any data, so there's just this execute button, and then my process is done. If I want to check on what's happening for my process execution, as I say, I can switch here from user view to administrator view, and then using this BPM menu on the left, I can go to the list of cases. So you will see that we have two different tabs in the list of cases. So in this BPM cases menu, we have the open cases, so that's the currently running cases, and we have the archived one, the one that are finished. And if I click on the ID of my cases, so here ID 1, I can view the tasks that have been done, all the tasks, including the service task. So we have the first task that was the validation task, then we have the gateway actually, and finally we have the notify request approved service task. So here we have a text list, a representation, the list of the tasks as text that have been done. Again, here, if you want the graphical overview of the process execution, like using the diagram here, this will be a feature of the subscription edition of Bonita. So just for the demonstration here, if I switch this true condition to false and run the process again, I'll start and submit the task. This time I should go in the default branch, so that will be the other task. So if I check on the history of my process, so in BPM case menu, the archived one, this is with the ID 2 here, you can see that I go through this notify request rejected task. So I actually take the other transition, the default one, because the transition to this task was set to false. So now we'll move on to the next topic here, and I will speak about the data in Bonita process. So actually in Bonita solution we have mainly two different kind of data. The first one that we'll use is what we call the business data, and so we create this business data model. So what is a business data model? It's basically a definition, a set of objects with some attributes, like for example in our case, in our process So we are focusing here on leave request. So we'll have a leave request object that will probably have some information such as what is the date, the start date of the leave request, what is the end date or the number of days maybe, and all this kind of information, business information related to our process. When you create a business data model, what's actually happened behind the scene is that will generate for you some Java object that will be manipulated by the Bonita engine, and will also create the database table to save the data. So they are stored in a dedicated database. This is a separated database from the actual Bonita engine database, because Bonita engine also have this database to store information about the process execution, like which step is currently pending, when the task was available, when the task was done, and so on. But we have a separated database to store all the data related to our business data model. And these data are available through the API of the engine, and you can also access them and update them, create them in the process execution. The other kind of data we have are the form data. Form data are the ones that are actually available in the web browser of the user. When you have this web interface, it will use the form data, to save the data the user create until the user click on the submit button of the form, and then we send the data from the web browser to the engine, and usually to the Bonita business data model, in order for the data to be saved. So I will explain later what's the path, how the data move from the form to the business data model. For the two different data type, so we have this business data model and we have the form data. There are different kind of data we support for the two, but actually they pretty much support the same kind of information. It's just that on one side, when you create your business data model, as I said, this will create some Java objects, so they can have attribute like simple attribute like integer, boolean, some text, some dates, but also you can create some more complex object by combining them with each other. So like if you have, for example, an invoice that have a reference to a customer, for example, you can make different objects and link them together. On the form data part, you have JavaScript objects, so you can create and define any kind of object. Usually you actually keep the definition of the object just to a simple name of the variable, and then you dynamically add the attribute of the object by binding the variable to the forms widget, but we'll go back on this later. One thing that is not really actually a data, but this is quite related, is what we call the documents, so basically the file that you can upload and attach to your process. So Bonita comes with a pre-packaged service for document management. The Bonita engine provides this kind of service. So when you upload the file, it will be stored in the Bonita engine database, and if you upload a new version of this file, the engine will keep the history of the file. So that's a very minimal document management solution, but this lets you easily upload and download files from the forms of your process. If you need, you can still take the file upload to Bonita and push them using one of our connector to another content management solution. For example, we have a connector to Alfresco, but we also have generic connector that use the CMIS protocol. This is a standard for communication with a wide variety of document management system, including SharePoint. So it's possible to push the document from Bonita to any external system. So far we have speak about the data that are handled by the process. Like our process will be able to create some data to update them in the different tasks. Like for example, if I get back to my leave request process, it will basically start with a new leave request. So we'll probably have the information about who requests this, who creates this request, what is the start date of the leave request, what is the number of days, and then a user, probably the manager, will review the request and make a decision like I accept or I refused this request. So we'll update, we'll have an extra attribute on our leave request object probably to store the decision of the manager. So we create it when we start the process, we update it later on when we have the decision of the manager. And there is a whole life cycle of our data in the process. And we capture that from the user by the web interface. And here we have data that are local to the web browser of the user, so that are on the client side. And this is the form data. And in order to make the link between the two, as Bonita support external solution for user interface, we define what we call a contract. So basically a contract is a way to tell what are the expected data to start a process or to execute a task. So when you are in Bonita Studio, you will be able to define a contract by selecting the pool, so the outer rectangle shape here. In execution, you will see that you can define a contract here. But if you then go to a task, a human task, you will see that again you have a contract, and this will be a different contract for each task and for also different from the process contract. Like the process contract, for example, here will ask for number of days and the start date of the leave request. On the task, will only ask to the manager if his decision is to approve or reject the vacation request. We only request one information, is the decision of the manager, whereas to start the process we request two different information, the start date and number of days. So when the user will submit this form in Bonita, we need to make sure that it matches the expectation of the contract. If it doesn't match the expectation of the contract, the process will not start or the task will not be executed. So this is a way to protect the execution and to secure the execution of the process by defining this contract. And we have this way some decoupling between the business logic that is in the process and the user interface. So if you feel like there is too much limitation with the Bonita UI Designer solution that I will show you later, you can still create your user interface with any solution you want, and then you call the engine API and the contract will do the validation. So here is a kind of overview about the flow of the data. So when you are in the web browser, you have the forms. So the user will fill in the forms. This will update the JavaScript variables, the form data. And when the user clicks on the submit button, it's actually sent a REST request to the engine API. So we'll have this HTTP call that will be made, and the data input by the user will be carried out as a JSON in the HTTP request. Then the engine will convert this to Java and do the validation of the contract. So make sure that it matches the data and the validation rule we might have on the contract. And then the data is captured by the contract can be used to initialize our business variables. So for example, in the default value of the business variables, you can use them. Or also usually on a task contract, as probably the business variable is already initialized, we are probably use the contract inputs to update an existing business variable, so that will be in an operation, or we might use them to trigger an interaction with another system, so using this connector mechanism. So it can be the input of the connectors, like for example if you want to send an email based on the user input in a task, you will use in the email connector the contract information as input of the connector. So now we'll move on the second exercise, and in this exercise we'll define the data model. So just to show you how this is done in the studio to create a data model. So first step is to go to Development, Business Data Model, and Manage. Here I can create an object, so just call this my business object for the demonstration, and it will have one attribute, like my attribute, just an easy one. When I will click on Finish, it will actually build this data model and deploy this data model into my test environment. And now if my process needs to work with this data, I need to have a reference variable. So I select the process here, go to Data, Pool Variable, and under Business Variable here I add one. So this will be my business variables, for example. And in the drop-down list here I can select the type of my data here. Right now I don't have any default value for this data. I'll leave it empty. The easy flow to initialize the data is first, so you create the definition, then you put a reference from your process to a business variable, and then in the execution here you see that I have this contract sub-tab, and I can generate my contract from the data. So I can click on this button here and I can generate the contract based on my data. So I can select here which attribute I want to initialize, and if I move to preview here, you see that it will generate for me this quick script to actually set the default value of my business variable. So we'll take the input, that the contract actually, and use it to initialize the attribute of my newly created business variable. So this is one way to define a contract, or you can also define it manually. The two options are valid. In the exercise I think we define it manually, at least for the validate request task. So now if I go back to the data here, you will see that the default value is set with the little script I showed early on that was generated from the contract. And once you have a contract on a process or on a task, you will see that when you run the process, you now have a default form that is automatically generated based on the contract that is defined on the process or on the task. So you see this warning, like it's a temporary form, it's also generated, but you can already start to test your process by inputting some data. Also, you will be able to use the data, for example, in the transition here. If you go to General and then you click on this Edit, you can then use the attribute of your business variable here by selecting the Java option, selecting the business variable, and then selecting one of the attributes that should be a Boolean. If it's not a Boolean, you need to go through a little script to do some tests. So here, for example, I have my attribute. I can compare it to the value test, and this can be a condition that I will use to go or not, I will use to take or not this transition. So I'll let you move to the next exercise. So in this exercise, you will define your data model, add a business variable, and specify the contract to start the process and to update the data in the task. Also, one thing about the data update on the task, for example, here if I will just add quickly a contract input here just for demo. If I want to use this input to update my business variable, I can use what we call an operation on the task. I add one here, I select the target, so that would be my business variable. And if I want to update one specific attribute of the business variable, I click on this link here and I choose the use a Java method option, and then I set which attribute I want to update. So this is my attribute here on my business variable, and then in the drop-down list I can select my contract input. So here it is in the drop-down list. So I'll let you go through this second exercise, and I will also try to answer a few questions that you can send in the chat. Okay, so regarding the question about the user interface and the customization, actually we'll see how we can create forms and adjust the forms just in the next chapter of this webinar, and we'll be able to customize the user interface, so in the next exercise. So please, if the question is not asked regarding regarding the customization of the user interface, ask it again just in the next after the next exercise. I'll just leave a few more minutes for everyone to finish the exercise, and then I will move on to the next chapter about the web user interface. Okay, so I will move on the next part and speak about the user interface. So in Bonita, here we'll speak about the first kind of user interface. We have what we call forms and what we call pages. Basically, to make the distinction between the two, forms are related and associated directly with a process diagram. So when you define a user interface, here when you select the process, you go to execution, you see here we have instantiation form. When you go on a task, this is also forms. So when it's directly linked to a specific process, this is forms. Pages are independent of any processes. They can present data from different processes. They can interact with various processes. They are totally independent from a specific process. A forms is actually connected to one process, and we have two types of forms. One of them is editable. It's a classic form we'll use first here. The one we use to start a process, so to instantiate a process, so to capture the minimal data from the user in order to start the process. Before the user submits this process, the process doesn't actually exist. Like, for example, there is no logic way to create and start a new leave request process without having captured the start date of the leave request and the number of days. So this is the purpose of the process instantiation form. We also have forms on human task. So for the user to submit the data and tell the Bonita engine to move forward with the execution of the process. If you are in the studio, you will see, so as I say, like when you select a human task and go to execution, you have this form tab. If you select a service task and automatic task here, you will see that you no longer have the forms tab here. So if you don't find the forms tab, first make sure that you are actually on a human task and not on a service task. The second type of form here is what we call the overview form. This is also at the process level, just as the process instantiation form, but the purpose of this one is just to give an overview, the current status of the process. Like if you want to highlight what is a current pending task, or what is the current value of the business data, you can do that in your overview form. all the form you will create with Bonita, and this is also true for the pages actually, are created with the UI designer. I mean, this is a standard and default solution to do so. And the UI designer will use AngularJS technology and Bootstrap to actually create these rich and dynamic forms, and so they can be responsive and adapt and be used on mobile device as well as on laptop and any kind of device, so people can interact with Bonita in their on their mobile device anywhere they are. To build the form, we use what we call widgets in Bonita. So we have this palette of widgets I showed you. When you open the UI designer here, you will see that you have this palette when you create a new form. Just create a quick one here. So you can see here when I create this manually from scratch, I can choose between an application page and a process form. So here I will create a process form, and then I have the widget on the left here. So we have a catalog of basic widgets, like the classic one, like the text input, for example. So usually we'll have a submit button here, and when you have a widget selected on the form here, you can see the settings on the right. For the settings, by default, this is some static information. So you can see, for example, on the submit button here, I have the data to send on the click. Here I can statically put some information, but usually I will use a variable. So I need first to click on this to switch to the expression of variable mode, and then I can refer to a variable. There is some explanation about the various signification about these different icons, like what is the meaning of the fx, this paragraph symbol, or the link here. In the embedded help here, if you click on the help, you can find more information. So it's in properties here. You can find information about constant dynamic value, bidirectional bound, and interpolation. So all the different mode for the settings, for the properties of a widget. So just while I'm on this submit button, you will see that a submit button can be used to actually start a process or submit a task. This is when the button is actually, when you are actually on a form that is related to a process or to a task. You will choose one of these two operations, but they can also be used to do some more generic HTTP requests. So if you want to interact with another web service, for example. The last part here on collection is when you have multiple lines, like for example you adding lines to an invoice. You can use a button to add or remove this kind of operation. So we have the standard widget here. Also this list of widgets are extensible. It's not only limited to the one we provide, but you can create your own with the UI designer. So as I said, we use AngularJS as the technology, the JavaScript framework to do this web interface. So you can create your own, or you can reuse one of the widgets that are shared on our community website by some of our users. They contribute some widgets, and so you can reuse them. Also, the other option, if you're feel like a little bit restricted with what you can do with the UI designer, or maybe if you are more familiar with another technology, as I said, with Bonita we really make a solution that is open, and so you can choose to use your external form solution. I will not demonstrate that during this presentation, but here you can see that when you select a task, for example, you can refer to an external URL to load when the process reaches this task. So you can embed Bonita with your own solution for the forms. So this is kind of the logic about what will happen when you actually want to display some data, because previously I explained how we save the data. If I go back here, as said, like when we are on a form, you submit this form And and when you submit this form, you will actually send the data from the form, so from the JavaScript variable to the engine, and then it will go through the contract and ultimately end up probably stored in some business variable. But if you want to display some data, not save the data input by the user, but display data to the user, you will actually need to again define some variables, and these variables will actually call the engine to retrieve the data, the business variable you have referenced in your process. And the business variable that you have referenced in your process actually refer to the data stored in the database, in the business variable database that is the backend of the Bonita engine. In order to perform this call to the Bonita engine API to retrieve the data, we actually go through a set of different variables. So you will have by default, when you generate the form, you will have this context variable that will be available, give you context information regarding the current task and that is related with the form you are loading. And it's not only the task but also the process instance information. And on this context variable, you will have an attribute that is named after your process variable with the suffix _ref for reference, and itself it will have a link attribute. So by using that, you are able to retrieve to get the link to call to get the information from the engine. I will just show you quickly how this works here. It will be better probably with some example. So let's go back here, and I'll just quickly create. I'll still have my business object. That's perfect. So let's say that I have a business object that is defined here. So I will say my business variable, for example, and I will just create a new one here. So I will quickly do this manually. And so my business objects go, and I will initialize the attribute of my business object. So here, instead of using the contract, I just define a static default value for my object. And we'll return this new object. Okay, so I have a default value on my business object. And now let's say that in the task here in the form, I want to display it. So I'll create a new form here manually on the task. And you see that I have this context variable here. And I will create a new variable in order to retrieve my business variable information. So let's say I'll call this business var. It will be actually an API call, and I don't type manually the URL because it needs to be dynamic. So I use this double curly brace here. You can see the tooltip below. It will let me inject some variable, so I'll use the context. On the context, I have this attribute that is named after my business variable. So my business variable here is named mybv, for example. So it will be mybv_ref and then .link. And this will actually retrieve the information from the business variable in my process instance related to my form. And then I can display that, for example, in a text field here. I just need to bind this with my business variable, and I want to display my attribute value. So if I save that, I'll actually run my process. Just add an end event. Yeah, I'll actually have two pools with the same name, so I will just update the name here. And run it. So I start my process, it goes with the default value that I defined, and now I'm on the first step, and you can see here it retrieves the data from my business data. One thing that is useful about the business data in the studio, you can directly browse the embedded database that is used to store your data. So if I click on this browse data, it will actually open up my web browser again, and I have this web interface to check on the database content. So I can select here the content, and I can see that I have my attribute here that is available. And so if I directly update the value here, I should be able to change it. Like for example, if I edit this one, say I'll test A, validate, and now I'll go back here, I'll reload my form, and I'll see that the data has been updated. So if you have various processes that collaborate to the data, for example, each task can reflect the update performed by another process. So now we'll let you move forward and create your forms. So you will see that we can have a first mock-up of the form if we are using the contract, at least for the input part of it. But when you want to display some information to the user, it's up to you to select which one you want to display to the user. For information for the next topic, we'll have a focus on how now we'll dispatch the task to the different people involved in the process execution. So right now when we run the process, we actually start the process and perform this task with the same user. You probably didn't notice it, but when you click on the run button, when you build the process and deploy the process, and then you have actually the form to start the process, you are already logged into Bonita. If you go to the URL, just localhost and /Bonita, you will reach the portal home page where you have the list of the tasks and so on. And you can see here you are logged in with our user named Walter Bates. If from here I go to process, I can actually start a process, so it's exactly the same as clicking on the run button. The difference is here, if I've done some update to my process definition, when I click on run, the new definition is deployed. Here I will still work with the old one. And here I will start my process. And if I go to the task list, you will see that I'm still Walter Bates and I can still do this task. So what I will explain right now is how we assign the task to different user or group of users, and what are the options to dispatch the task and choose who can also start a process in Bonita. So what we use in Bonita to define who can perform a task is what we call actors. Actors are basically just an ID, a name that we declare in the process, and then we associate this name to the task, or more usually to the lane, and task in this lane will inherit from the settings defined at the lane level. But we don't have only actors, we also have actor filters. So we'll compare the two different options and what are the meanings, how they behave, and what are the benefits and limitations of each of the two. So what I call actors is this definition of this ID in the process associated with the task through lanes, and then we map this actor to the organization. So I can show you that in the studio. When you select your process, so the pool at the pool level, and you go in the actor tab here, you will see that by default you have this employee actor that have been created for you. You can add other one, like actor 1, actor 2, for example. Just save that. And if you go in the configuration of this process with this configure button here, you will be able to map the actor, the various actor, to the organization, so to the users. But usually you don't map an actor directly to a specific user. You map it to a group. Like for example, actor 1, I can map it to the HR group, for example. Actor 2, I want to map it to the IT group. This means that when a task is in a lane that is associated with actor 1, only user that belongs to the HR group will be able to do it. So next step, when you have created your actor, you have configured them, mapped them to your organization, make sure that the actor is properly mapped to your lane. So for example here, right now it's the employee actor. I can switch, for example, to actor 1. Usually I will have more meaningful names here. So let's say that usually I will have, for example, HR for my actor, and I will have a lane that is named the same here. I will also name it HR, so this way I can visually know that, sorry, actually I'm on this one. I can know that the tasks that are in this lane belong to the HR users. If I'm here, for example, I select my actor 2, but actually this would be IT, so I'll rename the lane and I will rename also the actor. So I kind of match my name of the actor and my lane name. And now if I add any extra task to this lane, for example, so human task, you will see that it belongs to the actor that is in the lane. So I select step 1, you can see that it's configured to use the actor defined in the lane, and you have the reminder that this is HR. If I go on step number 2, this is the same settings, but this time it's belong to IT actor. So with the actor, you can configure this mapping, so you can configure a task to be mapped to a group. And as I said previously, so several users will be able to perform the task, but only one will actually submit it. So we have this mechanism in the portal to take the task. So far, before you submit the form, you have to take the task. This is because the default settings for the employee actor is that the task belongs to all the users in group ACME, and that's all the users of our default organization. So it's not only one user, it's several of them. The mapping is not necessarily on a group. We can select a list of specific users explicitly here. And we also have in Bonita what we call roles. Basically, a user will not be just in a group, it will be in a group with a role. Like it will be in a group sales with the role manager, or with the role senior and the role junior, or this kind of setting. So it gives more flexibility in the way you structure the organization, and so you can have various different ways to map the actor to the actual user of your organization. So this is a nice way to associate tasks with user, especially because if your organization changed, actually the mapping will automatically take that into account. For example, you have a task for your IT department that you map to the IT group, and they got kind of overloaded, and a new employee joined the company in the IT department, immediately will be able to perform the tasks that are belong to the IT actor. So it's really gives some flexibility because it's always up to date with your organization, and you can also update this actor mapping live after process deployment. So even if the organization changed, you can adapt your process configuration. You don't need to deploy a new version of your process. The limitation of this approach is like all this mapping is only based on the information of the organization. It's not based on the process data, such as an amount that a user might have been input, and we want maybe to have a different person that will handle, for example, a loan request based on the amount. Or like in our case, for example, we want the task, the validation task, to be performed by the manager of the initiator of the process, so the manager of the user who submits a request. So this is a mapping between the task and the user that is dynamic based on some process instance information or business data information. And in order to do that, we'll use a second mechanism that we have in Bonita that is called actor filters. And they are not properly filters actually. They are just another way, another alternative to build a list of users that can perform a task. So in our case, this will be just one user. This will be the manager of the initiator. And in the same way, you can configure that at the lane level. In the actor tab here, you still have to select an actor, but it can be override by the actor filter. So here, when I click on this set button, I will, for example, be able to use the initiator manager filter. We have a set of filters available by default, but if you want, you can create your own filters. Like if you want to integrate that with any skills management system, you can do that. And when I click on next here, I just need to type in a configuration, a name for this configuration. Actually, this is generic. Here it's always like manager of requester, for example. The name doesn't really matter. And there is no settings in this filter, only this option. And basically this option say that if the filter return one user, and this is the case for this kind of filter, the task will be automatically assigned. So it doesn't have to claim the task to take the task. One is in Bonita portal. As there is only one user, you will have no choice, but the task will automatically be claimed for him. And it's done, the filter is set, and the task inherits from the settings at the lane level, so the filter will apply to the task. So this is a two different option. Either you have this actor that are declared at the pool level, then mapped in the lane, and you configure a mapping between the actor and the organization, the company organization, in the configuration of the process, or you use filter, and filter can use information such as who started a process, or what is the current data on the process, and so on. One last word on actor mapping is about this specific little flag we have on the actor, is the initiator flag here. It will actually define which user can start the process. All users that are mapped with this actor, the one that got this initiator flag, will be able to start the process. So right now, all the actors in my organization can start the process because they are mapped to this employee actor. If I change the configuration here and on my employee actor, I remove the group and I only specify a different user, I will not be able, as Walter bet, to start the process. Here, this will fail because I don't have the right to start the process. So now let's move to the next exercise, and I will also take time to answer the question you might have. Okay, so I got this question related to usage of an external HR database. Actually, what we provide in our subscription edition, we have what we call the LDAP synchronizer, and basically it will be able to read out the information from an LDAP server such as Active Directory and create all the users in Bonita and keep both of them synchronized. I mean, the Bonita organization will follow what you have in your Active Directory or in your LDAP server. And also, if you have a different system, like a specific system, HR database, or another kind of existing user database, it's still possible to develop some custom component to do basically the same. We'll be able to read the information from your database and call the Bonita API to actually create the user in Bonita database, because basically all the API are open, so we can use the Bonita API to create the users and place them in some group, create some groups, and so on, and so try to synchronize any kind of external data source with Bonita. And also quick words about the feature also in the subscription edition regarding users. We also provide integration with a single sign-on system, such as Kerberos, so this is for Microsoft Server also as well, and also CAS for the single sign-on, and we also provide authentication with SAML for authentication in the subscription edition. Got an interesting question here, and I forgot to mention regarding actor filters. They are executed when the task become available. If for any reason there is change on the context related to the execution and the output of this actor filter, you can actually trigger a new execution of the actor filter by calling some Bonita API. So there is some solution to refresh the output of the actor filter if needed. We'll go back just a little bit to the previous exercise. One thing I forgot to mention, when you are building a user interface, what can be useful is to check out the web browser developer console to see the exchange when you submit a form. So I will just quickly import here the solution of the exercise. This one. Okay. And so what I want to show is if you are on your form here, and usually if you hit the F12 button, you can bring up the web developer console, and if you switch to the network tab and then you try to submit your form here, and you just need to choose to keep the logs after the submit. But if you click on that, you will see that you have an HTTP request that is sent, the first request that is sent, and it's actually called instantiation URL. And in this request, you will be able, in the parameter tab here, to find out about what are the data that have been sent. So here you see that I have this request inputs, so it's JSON data, and I have the value that I input in my forms, and this actually match what I've defined in the contract to start my process. Here I have a request input, and I have my leave start and day count attribute, exactly what I find here. So this follow the contract, this is valid value for the contract. It's match the constraint also I define in my process, so it's managed to start the process. If you have some error, like you sent invalid data, I can show this right now. I will just start another instance of the process. Like if I try to send a request for yesterday, for example, when I click on submit, you will see that I get this error here, this error code. I can see the data I sent, but also I can see the response here with all the information, like my error message here, that if start must be in the future. And if I fix that and enter some valid information, then again I will have a successful request, and also in the response you can see that I get back the ID of the process instance that was just created. So this can be useful if you're integrating Bonita with your external application. You get the ID so you can track the process execution later. Now I will speak about what we call connectors. Basically the idea of a connector is to integrate Bonita, so a running process. When you need to work with an external system, we go through what we call a connector. Basically the connector will have some inputs, so that can be your business data. You can also have some outputs, and in the middle of it, it will do some processing. So for example, an email connector will have some input, like you can take, for example, our vacation request information. Of course, as input, you will need to have some settings like the email address of the people who try to reach out, and we'll probably have no output actually because we don't get any data back. But if we call, for example, a web service, we'll have the output, the answer of our call to the web service. So this is a way for Bonita engine to have some interaction with external information system. And to do that, we provide a catalog of standard connector in Bonita. So if you select one of our tasks, for example, the notify request approved task, you will see that in execution tab, you have this connector in here tab. So we can add a connector, and here you see the catalog of connector we have by default. So in the list, you can find email connector, for example, but you will see that we have a lot of other connectors, like for example, I speak previously with some CMS, so Alfresco, but also the standard CMIS, with some CRM like Salesforce. But we also have more generic connector, like to call a web service, a sub web service, or to call some REST APIs. And we also have connectors, for example, with Google Calendar and so on. So we have a catalog of default connector available out of the box that should probably integrate with most common system. But if you need, you can also import other connectors shared on the community, and also as well create your own connectors. There are very basic Java classes, so if you need to integrate with a system that is not in the list, that is not available from the community, you can build your own, or you can work with Bonita Soft. We have consultants that can help you to set up your project, to develop your application, but also to create connectors. It's regarding the possible conflict between our connector dependency and the Bonita dependency. And actually, when you have in your process some connector dependency, they are isolated from the Bonita dependency, so they will have priority over what Bonita can provide. So it will always be your connector dependency that will be used to run your connector code, and the Bonita library will be only used for Bonita engine processing. So in the next exercise, we'll configure the email connector to send the notification. Actually, in this exercise, we use a local SMTP server, so local mail server. This is just to prevent any trouble in the configuration based on the different configuration you might all have. But just to let you know, for example, here for the email connector, we can of course use any standard mail server. Sorry, like the default settings here are, for example, for Gmail. So you can see that we have the host, and if I just type in my, if you type in your Gmail address, your password, and then you should be able to send an email using Gmail without any problem. But in the test, we use just a local one for testing purpose. So I'll let you continue with the exercise, and then we'll have some demonstration about how we can build some application with Bonita. Okay, so I'll move to the next topic, and now I'll speak about what we call our BPM-based application. And actually, to get the global picture, so right now what we have is we have our business data model that stores the information, and actually we have one process that will create some data and store some data. Also during the process execution, we'll update this data. We can imagine as well that we can have a second process that can work with the same set of data. For example, I can have a process to modify a leave request, for example, just to update the date if I change my mind. But maybe this process, if the vacation request is already approved, it will ask for another approval from my manager, or I can have different logic. So we can have several processes that collaborate on the same data. And this is great because it's helped us to keep all our process kind of simple. Like we'll not try to address all the different scenarios in one single process. That can be an issue if the data are related, if the data lifecycle and visibility is only related to one specific process. This process can become quite complex. Here we can have several processes that collaborate to the same data. And so we have this data model, we have the process that can create, update. It can also as well delete some data. And we have our user interface that presents the data to the users and also let them input some data and do some action on the process. So what we have basically is a model, view, and controller. And the model would be the business data model. We have the view in our forms, and we'll see we can have also this in our pages. And the controller is actually our set of processes that do the link between the model and the view. Now if I show you in the studio here, so we have created our process, we have our model, but now how to create this view that can be kind of independent of our independent of our process definition. So what I will do is I will launch the UI designer, and here I will start from scratch and I will create a new application page. So this will not be related to actually any process. And here I'll just call demo page, for example. And what I want to do in this application, for example, I want just as a first try to list all the vacation requests that have been created. So in order to do that, I will first check on what kind of data I currently have in my database, so I can browse them here, and I will check on the current status of all the leave requests. So I have 2 leave requests currently, so I can work with this data set. So by default here on a new page, we don't have any variable, we don't have any widget. It's just a blank canvas. And first off, I will create a variable to have all my requests, so to get all the information from my business database. So I will do a call to the engine, and the API to call, actually I can get some examples here by click on these links, and I want to call a business data query. So now I can show you what is the query and where do I find this query name, because basically here I have this kind of templates of URL to call. So I will just copy paste, and I will ignore the last part. I will not have any filter. I want just to get all my leave requests. So here I need to have the business data type. Getting this information, I can get this information from the development menu, business data model, manage. The data type, the full data type, is actually the package named followed by the name of the object. So it will be com.company.model.leave_request. So I'll just copy that and put it here. I don't want to use a dynamic variable. I'll just put it statically here. So leave request. And next I need a query name here. And actually again I will go in my business data model, and in my business data model, when I manage it, when I select my leave request, you can see that we have those tabs that we don't explore yet, but the query ones here, you can find all predefined set of queries. So we have this find request that will get me the list of the leave request I have right now, but we have other ones that use some attributes of the request to filter the list I get. So right now I don't want to have any filters, so I'll just use the name of the request that is in the column here that is find. I can as well create some custom one if I need to have complex logic, like a filter request with several criterion. I can create some custom request. But here I will keep it quite simple, and I will type my query name. We can also handle some pagination of the data. So if you have a large volume of data, you can paginate the results. Here I'll only have 2 in my demo, so I'll just keep it on page number 0, and I want 10 results per page. And this is it. Now I have my business data. What I can do to use this data, here the raw data that I will get, I will use this text widget, and I will display my data. So I'll just use my request variable that I define in my forms, and this is a raw result, so I will format this as using a JSON filter, and that's it. So now if I preview that, this is totally unrelated to any process. So if I hit the preview button, I can already see the data. I don't need to have this connection with the process. It's just a find query on my business data. So here I can see the raw result of my 2 data. But now I will tune a little bit this form here. So I put side by side here the preview and my form's definition, and you will be able to see, like, when I just add a new widget and click the save button, it's automatically refreshed on the right here. So let's say that I want my start date, for example. So I will customize first the header of my table widget, and I want the day count, for example. Then for the content here, I will actually bind this to my request data. So this will give me the content of my table, and here I will provide the name of the attributes of my requests that I want to display, so match them with the header here. So that will be the leave start, and that will be the day count attribute. If I want to have some interaction when I select one of the row, I can save the data related to the row I select, but here I'll just keep it like that. And you can see here I have the start date and the day count that come from my business data stored in the database. Now I have this page here, and I need to make it available to my users. And in order to do so, I will export it from the UI designer. This is the approach in the community edition of the solution. I export it. It will basically just create me a zip file with the definition of my page. And then I will save this, and I will move to my portal, so to Bonita portal, as an administrator. And in this administration view, in the resources tab, I can import my page. You can see that we have example of various pages. Here I can add my custom one. I'll upload it. And then I will create what we call the actual application. And an application is basically just a name, a URL, for example, demo apps. And I can choose to assign this to the user profile or to the administrator profile. And so here I will keep it for the user profile. So now I have an application, but it's rather empty right now, and then I can add some pages. So the pages I previously imported in the portal, here I can add it. So let's say I select my demo pages here. I define the URL where this page will be available, and I can make this the home page instead of the default one, and I will remove the default one. I can as well add some menu for navigation if I have several pages to let the user navigate in the application. And now if I load this link here, I'll be able to see my application page. So right now I have only one page in this application, but as I said, we can have multiple pages, make some menus to let the user browse the different pages. So you can have different, like the dashboard, links or buttons to start new process, to act on the pending task. And so you can have this business view that kind of hide the process logic that is behind the scene. So instead of having this flat list of tasks, you can maybe have more information that help him to take the right decision among the various tasks you have, choose a priority, and so on. So you have the default view that you get with the portal, but you have this custom view that you can get by creating an application. And application, so as you can figure out from here, is available on /bonita/apps, and then the URL you define in your application, and then the URL of the page. So now you can move on to the exercise number 6. So it is the creation of the application, and then I'll demonstrate how we deploy Bonita, a Bonita application, how we deploy the process, how we can configure the process, and so on. Regarding the capability of the pages to adapt the content on the currently logged in user, his group, and so on, it's actually possible to hide and display some content based on who is logged in, because when you are in a form you can get the information about the user that is currently connected, and so you can choose to hide or display some part of it based on who is connected. Actually, if you check out the vacation management example that is available in the community, it includes an application page and several processes, and you have this kind of logic to hide or display some information based on the user who is connected. Okay, I'll follow with the last part of the presentation, and there is no more exercise after this one, so I'll just talk a little bit about deployments, and then I will remain available to answer any question you might have. So, as I said at the beginning, the studio is really the development environment, and even if in the studio we have a fully operational test environment, like meaning that we have this application server, we have actually Apache Tomcat application server with Bonita engine and with two databases, like one for the Bonita engine, one for our business data. These are both two file databases, H2 database that we have embedded in the studio. And so we have the portal, and this is a fully featured Bonita server. And when you click on run, some kind of magic happens for your test to make the test easy. But when you want actually to deploy this process and this application into production, you will need to go through more steps, and I will just illustrate them right now, how you actually deploy a Bonita process. So what I will do right now is just illustrate that. Still I will using the embedded Bonita server, but I will try, I will remove all the process and do it just manually, just as I will do if I'm on a production server. So basically the first thing you will probably want to do when you have a production server is to create your organization. So make sure that your organization is available, so the user can connect. So you create your users, you create groups, roles, and you map your user with the profile. So either they have just the user profile or they have the administrator profile. So that's the first step. Once you have your organization set up, then you can connect with users on your Bonita portal. And when you go in the administration view here, if you go to BPM process, you will have no process deployed when you connect for the first time on a newly server installed. And in order to deploy the process that you have in your studio, you will need to build them. So let's take, for example, this process, the leave request process in version 3.0. How I build that? Actually, I will go in this server menu here, and I'll click on this build menu here. I'll save the change. And here I will just select this single process. I will only build one, and actually I will keep it in download here. And there is some error, so first I will check which kind of error I have on this one. And make sure, yeah, it's not an error, it's just a warning on the form, because I have this forms here, the overview page. I didn't define any forms, so I'll just say that I don't want to use it and click on no form, and so I can get rid of this warning. So as I said, I will build this process, click on finish, and here what it does actually, it create me what we call the .bar file. So this bar extension on the file you will be able to find here is actually the packaging of the process for deployment. As said, if I click on export here, what I will get is this .bos file. This is to exchange my process, my business data model. You can see it here. Business object is checked, diagram is checked. Also have the pages associated with my process that are been selected. So this is for data exchange. If you want to deploy, it's not the export, it's the build here in the menu. And now I have this file, this bar file. I can go to my portal, logged in as administrator, and in this BPM process menu, I can install it. So when I click on this install button, I then get this pop-up to select my bar file, and I will upload it, and it's bring me to the configuration of the process. By default, the process is disabled. I can check the configuration of the actor mapping, and it's what I said previously is I can update live this mapping. So right now it's mapped to all the groups in my organization. I can change this live. Process can also have parameters. We didn't use them in the exercise, but that's, for example, a good fit if you have your email server address. Like, you probably want to go into data here and declare a parameter, like my email server address. It would be text, and then you can use that in your connector, and it can be it will become part of your process configuration. So in such case, if you have parameter declare, they will become available here. Parameter cannot be updated live in the community edition, but they can be updated live only in subscription. You can also see any connector you have in your process, and you can make adjustment to the connectors. Now, if I get back to my list of process, so right now this one is disabled. As it's properly configured, I can enable it, and as it's configured to be available for all users to start, thanks to the configuration of the actor mapping. You remember that in the setting of the process here, we have this flag on the actor, and this actor is mapped to all the groups, so everyone can start the process. So if I switch back now to the user view and go to the process tab here, I can see the process, it's available, and I can click on start to go to the start of the process. So here I can submit a request, for example, and the process starts. If I go to the task list here, I can see the task is available. Also, let's say that now I want to deploy a new version of my process. I improved it, I changed something. Best approach with Bonita to do that is actually I will go to my process here, and I will disable the current version, and then I will install the new one. So for the disabled process, if I get back to my user view, you can see that I still have the task in the list. I can still finish this process instance. I can go at the end of my process, but if I go to the process list, it's no longer enabled, so I can no longer start any new instance with this old definition. If the new definition is available, I can use it to start a new instance of my process. So that's the way to deploy the process and to manage the process. So you can view them and do such action here in the process menu. You can see the ones that are disabled. You can see if they are disabled because they have invalid configuration. This is a result, or result that have still valid configuration. You can see the stats here. You can see that I have one ongoing case that uses process definition, and I have 0 that are archived. You can list all the case by going to the case menu. You can use a status of pending, archived, filter, and you also have the access to the overview form here if you want, and you can view all the detail of the case here. If I want to deploy my application, as I showed you previously, it's always the same for the production server. You can click on add, you select your application page here, and for your application actually you can export it and then you can import it back. So I did that. Here I have my application configuration and I just import it, and now it's ready to be used again. If you want to export the one you create in your the Bonita portal, you can click on this export link here. in the portal. So I think that's it for the deployment. The application deployment, I already covered it. So I will now try to answer to the last question you might have. So I got the question to know if we can have more than one version of the same process enabled at the same time, and yes, you can have multiple versions of the same process that can be available at the same time. So as I said in the demonstration, if you have a running process instance that is relying on a one definition, for example as a 1.0, and then you deploy the version 2.0, the existing case will still run with the version 1.0 and will finish with the version 1.0. And if you have this long-running process with version 1.0 and you want to move them to version 2.0, there is some solution to do that. It's rely on the API. Like you can get the status of the current process and you can start a process with another definition, not from the beginning, but at a specific task, a specific status in the process. And regarding the automation of the deployment and also collaboration, again, my response will be that this is some feature of the subscription edition. The subscription edition, when you work in the studio, you can connect the studio to Subversion, and also it should be available soon, the integration with Git. So you can connect your repository and several users can collaborate on a single repository. And we already have some videos available about what we call Bonita continuous delivery, and basically this is a system to create server instance quickly in the cloud for deployment, mainly for test but also for production. And we also bring some continuous integration capabilities, like to automate the build of your bar file, for example, of your business data model, all that, and automate the deployments on your server, and also automate the execution of the process for testing purpose, so we can have some tests to make sure that the process reach a specific step and so on, check the business data value, etc. But there is some dedicated webinar on BCD module for that, so I invite you to watch the video if you are interested on this feature, or get in touch with us in order to get more information on such feature. So about this webinar, so we are almost at the end. Just one reminder, if you want to watch this webinar again, you will be able to find it on Bonitasoft website. So if you go to here, to Bonitasoft website under resources video, right now you can find the previous edition video, but we'll publish soon this video. Also for French speaker, we have a French edition that will be available soon. The recording, the webinar was last week. We have also, as I said, previous presentation, like about the various integration between Bonita and third-party technology or customer use cases, all that available as videos. So I invite you to check that if you want to find the recording of the video. Also, the video are published on our YouTube channel, so you can connect to YouTube and check the list of Bonita video from YouTube or Vimeo. And about the other resources I can recommend, obviously we have the documentation, the official documentation of Bonita. If you don't find your answer to some technical question about how to use some feature of Bonita, we have on community.bonitasoft.com, we have the forum where you can post your questions, see questions from other community users. Still on the community, you have in the Learn section here, you have some examples. So they are shared by the community, mainly also by Bonita 7. On the upper right corner here, you can find the official example, such as, for example, the vacation management. You can see that this is quite close actually to what we did, but with a lot of extra steps, like you have the integration with Google Calendar, for example. You have other business objects to manage some counter of number of days of vacation, and you have also several processes that collaborate on same data, like to modify vacation request, to cancel vacation request, and so on. And you have the associated application page that is connected to the process. So you can check out on that if you want to have a little bit more complex example. And also something that is quite similar, but you can check on in the documentation the getting started tutorial that is also worked through creation of a first application. And finally, so if you want to reach out to us about some feature of the subscription edition, some pricing, any particular request you might have with your project with Bonita, you can fill out the form, contact us, that is available from the website, and we'll get back to you soon. Someone from Bonita 7 will get in touch with you. So that's it. Thanks a lot to all of you who joined us today on this webinar. So feel free to reach out through the community or through the corporate website to us, and we'll be pleased to help you with your Bonita project. Thanks a lot, and have a nice day or nice evening.